And now I think that there has been this whole kind of like, okay, we want to make sure that we are seen as allies during this time. And a lot of it can be seen as like performative because the track records don't actually line up. There are some brands that just get it, like Procter and Gamble. I think they're a brand, who has like other brands under it that just really gets it from the advertisements on TV about the conversation to even the look, where the conversation is the conversation that parents have to have with their Black sons and dealing with the police, to the look, dealing with a Black man going about his everyday life. And then at the end of the commercial, you see he is a judge. And I think that there's, even Nike and I think Twitter, who understand that they really align themselves with the Black community. But then there are those like the NFL who pretty much iced out.
Welcome to the Networking with Michelle podcast, the show dedicated to providing you with life strategies with a little bit of entrepreneur advice. Here we believe in the Jim Rohn quote, success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day. Hey everyone, welcome to the Networking with Michelle show. I'm your host, Michelle Gomez. Today is episode 6 of Perspective of Black Lives. Before we get started, I want to give a special recognition to our sponsor, Market My Market. They are the #1 digital SEO company that you can find. If you are curious or struggling with SEO, that is the website you want to go to. That is the company you want to go to. They have a great website full of resources, great podcasts. You can learn a lot. You can hear how other business owners are applying SEO to grow their business. And then, of course, you can hire them. So what better way to market your business than with Market My Market? With that being said, this week we are focusing on marketing and messaging. I thought this was really important because, once again, in the midst of this current situation, social justice, racial uprising, as I call it, a lot of these companies have decided to donate hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into social justice with a ton of organizations, right? And that is needed. That is needed. Don't get me wrong, but we do need more, right? And in today's episode, I talk with Paris Tyler. She's the founder of Vibrant Communications, and we talk about the dynamics of the Black dollar. We talk about multicultural marketing and messaging, and I love this conversation. One, we actually recorded a few days after the death of Rashard Brooks, so rest in power, brother. And so she's based in Atlanta. So we just talk about the current state of how the city is feeling at that moment, and what do we do? What is the balance of supporting these white corporations when they have Black employees, as well as supporting Black business owners? It's just a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, Paris Tyler. Paris, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much, Michelle, for having me. I'm excited to join this conversation this evening.
Yeah, a lot has been going on, and especially with the multiple crises that we've been having, and within the past 6 months, as a marketer, it's always good to talk to other marketers and kind of get that perspective, especially with what the corporations are going through.
Yes.
And I look forward to this conversation. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Definitely. I am the founder of Vibrant Communications, which is an integrated communications agency based in Atlanta, Georgia. We support small size businesses to startups as well, with just creating their stories and just creating that dynamic narratives to get their stories told and connecting with their consumers, whether it's through media, events, influencer marketing, as well as social media strategy. I have been in the PR industry for more than 13 years, actually. Got my start at Weber Shandwick in Chicago, Illinois, and have worked with a variety of agencies to even Edelman Flowers Communications Group, which is a multicultural agency in Chicago as well. I moved to New York in 2013, where I worked with DKC and leading their tech division, as well as did a short stint working with Sean Diddy Combs and being a PR manager over at his enterprises of Holmes Enterprises, which is all of his brands, and have been independent for the past 3 years. So definitely bring a multitude of experience from food and beverage to beauty, as well as some tech experience as well.
Yeah. And you're based in Atlanta right now. So can you speak to the climate? Because there's just been a lot going on in the past 2 weeks, and then unfortunately this past weekend.
Exactly. So this past weekend, of course, the video of Rashard Brooks came to light. The gentleman that was asleep in the Wendy's drive-through and was killed by officers Friday night. Basically, of course, there was resistance to arrest and then him running away. But the climate definitely has been, I think, just been heavy overall for the past 3 weeks. Of course, with the murder of George Floyd, but I think it just reignited the spark here in Atlanta. And of course, Atlanta is the home of the civil rights movement. There's monuments and just so much history that goes here in the city. Our mayor is a Black woman who I believe is just, justified in her stance of understanding the Black experience and wanting to ensure that, Black Americans in general who live, in this city are protected, that are also just, of course, especially when it comes to policing. But I think that right now things have just been very much so heavy. The Wendy's was burned down. The protests have been taking place over the weekend in front of the governor's mansion to also where the Wendy's was burned down. So everyone is just, I think, across the globe, especially here in the United States, just fed up. We're just wanting change, especially when it comes to policing in our communities, policing when it comes to us in general as well.
Yeah, and it is difficult, and I think what makes it more complex and frustrating is, the same weekend or days apart, we see a white person doing a very, if not the exact same thing,
Yeah.
and they're arrested and they're alive and they're on bail and they're back home. And I'm like, how can you not see
The
yeah, racist, systemic,
Mm-hmm.
just so many things. And I mean, I feel like I'm still young. I'm 37. But the blindness baffles
Yes.
among us.
Yes. And I think that blindness is a choice because I think now when the evidence is so apparent and you're choosing to remain blind, I've had conversations with friends who've said they've actually connected with like white peers, whether they're, coworkers to friends from childhood who basically did not know that racism was this bad. And I think that's just a choice. Like you have that privilege to, live in this kind of like this shell of like not having to experience it and then choosing not to even understand it or even see it, especially when everything from like the Trayvon Martin case to most recently with I think George Floyd was just like the breaking point for all of us. But it's just like every case that has come out from, Tamir Rice to John Crawford, to Breonna, Taylor, to Sandra Bland, like all of these cases of Black bodies being, murdered senselessly. And like you said, when white counterparts are in the same, if not worse situation, especially with, the conversation around Rashard is, why couldn't the police officers just escort him home or, just go ahead and, make sure that he got home safely. And then we think about the gentleman, and his name escapes me, who basically walked into a church and killed 8 people and was taken to a Burger King, after. And you can't tell me that there is no way that, he is not afforded the same liberties of just like, let's make sure that he gets home safely. He's clearly drunk. He's parked his car. And I just think that this is just the time that needs to be, who knew that 2020 would bring about this? Like, who knew that from coronavirus to now that the world is at a standstill and we are now finally, everyone's just waking up and finally seeing that, look, this is how unjust our systems are that are in place.
Yeah, so I've been getting into a lot of social media, Facebook arguments. I prefer to argue on Facebook. And, white people will find some old, mishap where, unfortunately, in 2016, there was white guy that passed away due to police brutality, and I forgot his name. And, this white guy posted it, and he was like, "Where is the outrage?"
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh, I got time today."
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so, I watched the video, I looked it up, and I gave him a response. I was like, "Look, this is bad, and my heart goes out to his family and friends and this whole situation."
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, this guy died 3 weeks after Philando Castile. Like, no one's checking for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then it was in Dallas. And I know during that protesting time, Dallas had some other things going on, and Dallas PD, that's another issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I told him, like, you can't expect Black people to be in outrage over white lives. Like, you need to tap into your white community for that outrage. Like, we are protesting for our people.
Exactly.
And I know this because I'm a Black person. I'm a Black woman living in a Black experience, receiving Black news. I don't know what y'all do. and, it was a good dialogue, but I commend him as well as the other people in that comment section, because they were like, this was very well put. And I don't think they've ever had the chance to have that conversation, whether online or in person.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, even the news has some racial undertones with that on what we, hear and see and obviously choose to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a lot. And I was like, I feel like white people need to be outraged over their white issues, and Hispanic and Latinas, I'm in Texas, and Asians, we all have our own separate issues, but you have to tap into your community for that.
Yes, I agree. And I think that, like you said, the timing of it all, Philando Castile, but then I think it just happens more often than not in our communities. Like, it's just there's no comparison to how often, white people are killed by police in comparison to Black people. And I think too, there has been a story floating around about the one officer, and I believe this happened in Minneapolis, that a Black officer killed a white woman, and they have, like, he's been charged, he's sitting in prison, and then her family got like $20 million or something, like the settlement, which is, like, I believe the largest they've said in history. So there's just still this, this unjust, like, this disparity that's taken place, across the board, even when it's split, when the officer is Black and the victim is white.
Based on your experience, because I know you work with a lot of brands, how have you been able, or can you give us some insight on what the conversation has been like, I guess, for the past 6 weeks, 6 months, pre-COVID, during COVID, and I say the racial uprising?
Yeah, I think I believe that pre-COVID, I think it was business as usual for many businesses and many brands. We were pretty much just kind of like operating as if, like the world was just pretty much, typical. And I think that once COVID hit, now there was a kind of an evolution of pivoting with businesses on, okay, we can't, of course, have these like in-person experiences. So everything's moving to digital. And there's this concern around safety and making sure that they are thinking about their consumers and, whether it's self-care or just like mental health, and how they can just be supporting their consumers and community during the time if they're self-quarantining or social distancing. And now with racial uprising, because especially when it comes to the Black consumer, I feel that, we would see marketing collateral with Black models. We would, of course, see a few, tweets and social posts that were, of course, using what could be like slang or language that, permeates through our culture. And now I think that there has been this whole kind of like, okay, we want to make sure that we are seen as allies during this time. And a lot of it can be seen as like performative because the track records don't actually line up. There are some brands that just get it, like Procter and Gamble. I think they're a brand who has like other brands under it that just really gets it from the advertisements on TV about the conversation to even the look, where the conversation is worth the conversation that parents have to have with their Black sons and dealing with the police, to the look, dealing with a Black man going about his everyday life. And then at the end of the commercial, you see he is a judge. And I think that there's, even Nike and I think Twitter who understand that, you know, they really align themselves with the Black community. But then there are those like the NFL who pretty much iced out Colin Kaepernick for using his First Amendment right, on the job. And now they want to say that they're going to celebrate Juneteenth. It just very much so doesn't add up. Or even just, I will say, working in PR last week was, or even the last couple of weeks, media companies, the way they pay freelancers, the way they pay their staff writers, all of these experiences have been coming to the surface of especially for Black women, being on the job and not being paid fairly, their ideas being taken, their experiences of just, being in these toxic environments. And these companies or, these outlets are trying to, appear as like, hey, we are for the people, Black Lives Matter. But then your Black employees didn't matter while, they were there on the job. So I think that right now there's been this, of course, evolution towards like, okay, how can we show, allyship? But then for myself as a Black consumer, and I'm sure others, they want to make sure that you're showing up in a real authentic way. Like, does your senior leadership reflect, Black people, your board? Are, Black executives being paid fairly? Your hiring practices, even as far as like how you're hiring as well. I think that is just very much so important. And if we're finding that there are racists a part of your leadership team, I believe it was Bon Appetit, whose editor in chief had to step down because of a picture of him on Instagram surface of him basically dressed in brownface. He was dressed as a Puerto Rican. And I think that, there is no room for that. There should never be any room. And even before Black Lives Matter and everything that has happened in the past few weeks, that just should have been, nothing that a company should ever stand for.
How do you help your clients like navigate that? Especially like, once again, especially right now, because I just feel like it's been one issue
Yeah.
after another, and you constantly have to switch your messaging and cater to people. And I know it takes a while to do a good marketing campaign.
Right.
So how do you help your clients in that regard?
I think right now it's all about, I think transparency is key. I think transparency, and then just acting effectively and actually just even expeditiously right now. Like, there's no time to really wait. There's no time to straddle the fence either. Like, we have to put our foot down on, this is what we stand for. We stand with the Black community. We want to see, systematic racism, pretty much just burn it down. We want to put in place, even in our own, backyard, like how can we make sure that we're putting in the right processes and practices. And as a communicator, and especially as their agency of record, I'm there to be, their counsel. Like, I'm there to, of course, ensure them that, hey, this will not be effective, but maybe it's more effective if we say this. Let's be transparent in sharing numbers, but then say, and let me know, make sure that we are, or you are, internally putting in the right processes to make sure that, hey, we are, we are, even though we are a Black-led team, but our larger organization may need to do better. We're having those conversations, behind the scenes, or even we are open to ideas from our Black consumers of how we can even show up for them. Like, I think a lot of the brands I work with, they do listen, they take notes. And if, right now, if this isn't acceptable for them, what would make them feel, more comfortable or just feel more connected, and in that you're being an ally during this time.
Um, so how do we gauge when it is performative versus, someone like a Nike is embedded, or I guess
Yeah.
Black culture is embedded in your brand? Because one thing I've been harping on is, if you included us earlier, you wouldn't be in this situation today.
Right. Right. That is so true. And I think that is so important. I think, as someone who's been in the industry for 13 years, and now that I've been independent for more than three, the one challenge I've had, because I still, I can still work as a freelancer or a contractor, is actually being tapped by white agencies to do multicultural work for them. So pretty much they are working with X, big brand, and they have to pull together, an African American, marketing strategy, or it might be new bit, biz development. And it's just like, how can these brands ensure that, on their side, the key decision makers understand, like, you know what, we can't give this work to them because their company doesn't reflect the consumer that we're looking to speak with, like, or that we're looking to connect with. Because how can they bring good ideas to the table if they don't have that experience? It's just so inauthentic. So I think as, for brands, just ensuring that their agencies, and I know that some brands do ensure, I believe like Unilever has, in place that their agencies have to reflect, across the board, just like people of color or women. And I think that's just really, really important, because right now you can tell when it's inauthentic. You can just tell, like you said, if you included us earlier, this is what would be, happening. Even Bank of America, I know that for them, they've paid out, lawsuits for hiring practices, and I believe their board and their executive leadership team still only represents like 5 people of like color, or 5, Black executives, 5%, excuse me. That's what I'm trying to say, 5%. And it's just like that, when we're not at the table, or when we're not in those key decision making positions, then this is what happens. Like things like, this like falls through the cracks. And then you're scrambling to figure out like, what is our messaging? What can we say? Or can we say that? So I even saw like Ethica, the fitness brand, I believe, they pretty much had a post up that just said like, it is what it is about racism. And then of course they tried to backtrack. Who knows? I don't know if this was a social media manager issue or what this was, but I could not believe that that is the statement you want to put out. It's best if you don't have anything to say, then just don't say anything at all. But please know that your silence is complicit. Like you're basically saying, by being silent, we're okay with where things are in our country, which is, no one should be comfortable with.
What's your take on Starbucks with the?
Yeah. I'm really still confused about that, because I believe that if it was all about your employees wearing your Starbucks attire, then wouldn't that have come out like as far as a big announcement, like, hey, Starbucks has Black Lives Matter apparel and attire. You can see their employees wearing it, going forward. I think for me, it sounds like they backtracked. Like they really were, they were really basically like, hey, we don't want you wearing anything that's related to the movement. And with all the backlash, and especially from a company that just, they had this whole like, bias training, like unconscious bias training, closed down Starbucks like nationally for a day or two. And even with them being in the news around, Black men being arrested in their Philadelphia location for just being there and waiting on someone for a meeting. It's just very much so. It's just such a mistake, like a huge mistake, and a mistake that a brand such as Starbucks should know better to make, than to make.
And that's like, I don't know, all of these situations, there's just a disconnect, and even I've been a member of the Black MBA for several years, and I went to a conference, and I know they sponsored the conference. I know their hiring and sponsoring diversity or African American initiatives, because that's what I keep up with. So, when these types of things come out, it just baffles me, especially this particular one with the Black Lives Matter t-shirt or clothing, because even though the situation that happened with the two men at the store, I can understand how that's an isolated situation, but then corporate's going to make a statement, right? So it's like I can kind of separate that, but this reason, I'm like,
yeah. It just seems like such a rookie mistake, and I'm even wondering if something leaked. Like someone leaked that to the press. So it just seems like there was like you said, a disconnect, maybe even between an internal and external comms where like an employee got it and was like, what? Like, this is what's happening. And it got out. And then they were like, oh, wait, we got to scramble and clean it up. But it just, like you said, for a corporation such as Starbucks, like, it just seems to me it's definitely baffling where it's like, oh my gosh, like, and we now live in a culture that is cancel culture. Like it's hashtag cancel culture. Like we will cancel you in a heartbeat. And, and of course, out of the Starbucks situation, stories started circulating of Black-owned coffee shops or Black-owned coffee brands that you can buy. So, and I think that is like also the upside of what we're seeing right now is like, of course, these national, global brands that you may support, they may not be Black owned, but here are like a variety of, brands that you can still support, from like beauty to food and beverage, to fashion even, that I think, are being highlighted that we may not have known about. So of course, that's always a great thing to see.
Yeah, I'm definitely for the economic development of the Black community, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship. And it's like this ongoing conversation in the sense that, I had a talk with my mom yesterday, and we're talking about how the Wendy's burned down. And yes, we do think of Wendy's as a white owner, and even maybe a white person owned that particular location. I don't know. Yeah. But Black people were working there. And now you put these people out of a job, and it's like, what are we going to do, and what are we going to learn?
And that's the white woman who burned it down. Yeah, so of course, and I think that's one of the challenges too with the movement. People are peacefully protesting, and then we have people who are whatever their agendas are, who are coming in and just like trying to hijack. And like you said, that's where people probably went to eat, and like that may be like what they could afford a few times a week, or what they were working, that job there to, whether they're students nearby or whatever. So,
yeah. And I think we have to do a better job trying to find that balance. And I know a couple of years ago, when everyone was like, oh, well, where are the Black-owned banks, and there was that migration to Black-owned banks. And I'm like, well, I don't want to leave my Black banker
right.
at my local bank. And I still feel like I'm supporting a Black person. They got a commission off of me, or, whatever.
That's true. And I think it's what makes you happy, or what makes sense too. Like, where can you put dollars to support? And then maybe like, where can you, if it's continuing to bank at, a different, national bank, I think it's totally fine. But then maybe it's like, I'm supporting the Black-owned cleaners, or the Black-owned coffee shop, that's, around the way. I think it's definitely finding that balance, because I know that for the beauty industry, there's this pull up or shut up challenge that brands have had to share their numbers. They've had to share their leadership numbers, their board numbers, their team numbers, as far as how the makeup of their company is, if it's, a certain percentage woman versus man, white versus Black versus Asian, or Hispanic. So the transparency there, now their consumers can hold them accountable for, okay, we know we need to do better. So now they know, their consumers know, hey, we know this is how there's only like maybe there's no Black women on their team. Do I continue to put my dollars behind this brand? Or do I just sit back and watch and see what they do as far as hiring practices? I think the 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 best I think course of action we've seen is from is it Alexis with Reddit, Serena's husband?
Yeah.
And stepping down. He basically stepped down and put a Black man in his seat. And I think those are the actions that we want to see. We want to see, like we don't want you to wait. We want action now. We want to see processes now. We want to see how are you going to start that change because waiting 2 months down the road and we're still not, you're still trying to figure it out just won't necessarily work because people take a matter of days to study for for talks, for panels, to become an expert on any given topic. But you're telling me that you can't necessarily just implement, a new hiring practice or ensuring that there's pay equity across the board within the company. I think that there can't be, basically.
There's a lot of talk about the consumer holding these companies accountable, but what about employees, business owners such as yourselves? When you do land those contracts, some contracts are, what are some things that we can do or that we should look out for as an employee working in a white business, white corporation?
Yeah, definitely. I think I will say that when you have use your voice. I think there can be moments of discomfort and fear in using our voices to vocalize where we stand, or even of course there's this whole argument too of like when you are one of few within a company, how you sometimes have to speak for all of us. But there are those moments where if you're having us at the table, it's like, okay, we need to say like, this won't work. I think it's okay to counsel and educate and feel empowered to do so. And if you don't, and I've read stories across the board this week of people who said that they've shared, their discomfort or how they just felt like the environment wasn't necessarily fostering growth. And it came back to bite them, in the butt. They didn't feel like it was a safe space for them to necessarily share how they were feeling. And it's like, how can we nip that in the bud immediately? I know as far as like me being an agency and working with brands, I always push back, when I can. Like I'm like, you know what? I just don't necessarily feel like that's authentic. I don't think that, it's on brand. And, of course, my client will choose to, of course, follow my counsel or they may not, but that's what I'm hired and what I'm paid to do. And I think even when you're an employee, your ideas, your creativity, they're paying you for that. So of course, speak up. And if you're seeing that your ideas are being stolen or you're just not being heard, then of course there's time to bring in, I think, maybe have a larger conversation with the right parties about how that can be broken, because I've been in those environments. I've been in like toxic work environments where I'm feeling like I don't have a voice. I don't, I can't, I'm not being heard. So of course there is a culture within corporate America, even where we're not necessarily always fostered or empowered, I would say.
Yeah, it's a delicate situation. So you're in Hotlanta, aka Wakanda for some. I like Killer Mac. Been a fan of him. T.I. We have a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, I know, right? I think we all do. We're like, oh yeah, and then you're like, oh no.
But overall, I do commend those brothers. And even now, there's just a lot of celebrities stepping up to the occasion, traveling across the nation for different protests. How important, or what's your take with celebrities, in the movement, entertainers, athletes, all of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're using their platform for good, for And we've seen that, time and time again with like LeBron, we're seeing it with the Knowles, with Beyonce and Jay-Z, or with Carter rather, where, Beyonce most recently wrote a letter to Louisville, about Breonna Taylor, calling for their arrest of her killers. We're seeing even with like Jamie Foxx traveling to Minneapolis. And I think it's important. I think it's important because they have millions of followers, not just here in the U.S. where we are fighting for, our time right now, but globally, and bringing, for shedding a light and bringing it to their global followers, not simply where, basically bringing it to light for them. And I think that, I heard, of course, like Dave Chappelle, we watched his special and him saying like the streets is talking, which is true. Like we can definitely continue to allow the streets to be the leaders. But I believe that, even during the civil rights movement and where Harry Belafonte and Muhammad Ali and Lena Horne and all of these entertainers and athletes like Jim Brown, they all use their platform to for the call for civil rights. Like, I think that it's important, and not just even with Black celebrities, we're even seeing it with white celebrities who are using this platform because right now in our community, I think we know like racism exists. We know, but I think that, and I read this somewhere, like where white people are more inclined to listen to white people when it comes to talking about racism. And I think having white allies, especially in white celebrities, and I believe that Black celebrities can probably bridge that gap there, is definitely important.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I want to talk a little bit about personal brand, kind of going back to the workspace a little bit. And you kind of mentioned how it is challenging to speak up in these spaces. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for anyone when it comes to separating their personal brand? Maybe they are a bit mild at work, but they're, pro-Black and right. outside of that. And then, of course, with the social media intake. So what advice would you give to that person?
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is like, in 2020, we want to be in work atmospheres that allow us to be our true, authentic selves. But of course, in the Black community, we have to go through code switching where, we are one way around our colleagues. And then outside of those office walls, we are a completely, different person. But I think there is a way to, even maybe as you start out or even during the hiring process, I think you understand the culture of a company to know who you have to be or how you have to be at work. And I think right now, most individuals seem to be choosing companies that allow them to be their true selves. I think even for Black women, we've, of course, like during interviews, we probably haven't even we're wearing our hair straight instead of just wearing our textured hair or wearing a protective style such as braids because we don't want to have that work against us in getting the job. But I think on social media, I think it's totally fine. Like, be who you are on social media. If your coworkers choose to follow you, this is who you are. And I think that if it ever comes up, I guess in conversation, I think that's a conversation for education, for them, where it's like, they're seeing your content and it's making them uncomfortable. They have the choice to unfollow you if that's the case. But I think that companies nowadays in 2020 and going forward should, want employees who can be genuine and authentic and bring a different perspective to the work and to their offices. I think that's just so important in just having diverse voices. I think there are studies that show like diversity, at work, just it really does like add value to the work that you're doing. And I think that's totally, totally important.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what else? What else do we need to cover, need to learn? Right. It's just such a It's a difficult climate right now.
Yeah, I think for brands right now, I think this is the one piece that's because I think that there's a time to, it's okay to be silent. And I think some brands, like, not necessarily, remaining silent, but like
Mhm.
once you say something, it's okay if you're not as content heavy on social media because you're thinking about what is your community or what are your consumers like pretty much engaged with. If they're engaged with the movement right now, then it's okay to take a step back and maybe figure out like how can we support during this time? Like how can we show up as true allies and really be allies, not only in our content, but maybe it's like through support and providing resources, even. And I think that sometimes right now companies are, there might be companies in this mindset of like I have to still sell, and of course, bills have to be paid, but then it's like paying attention because you don't want to be the brand that was tone deaf, that was insensitive. Um, and I actually even had to counsel a client of mine on that, recently, like, hey, it's okay to just take a step back and figure out like how can we show up during this time, and if you don't know, then maybe giving it some time before starting to kind of conduct as normal, whether business as usual. And even during the coronavirus, so when the pandemic hit, having to counsel a client like, actually, let's take a step back, maybe figure out how we can pivot during this time and show up and be a resource because people are losing their jobs, people are dying, people are, really going through it with being disconnected and not being able to be really engaged with loved ones, physically. That can be, affect someone's mindset. So just really thinking about that. Because I think when this is 2020 is like very much so new territory, I think for everyone. No matter who you are, you have been affected by COVID-19. I think even right now with the uprisings, like no matter if you're Black, white, Latino, you are seeing the protests. If you have a conscience or compassion, I'm sure it's definitely heart wrenching to see and understand. And I think as a company and a corporation, it's like, how can we really connect with our audience and really show up and be a resource? Because I think that's the true way to really show up right. It's like, how can we be a resource, whether it's supporting donations or education? All of that is just really important right now.
Yeah. I do think people have been showing up. Last year, I started the African American Marketing Association, which has been a journey in itself. But I have definitely been swarmed with emails the past 2 weeks
Yeah.
about, hey, didn't know you were here. How can we get involved?
Yeah.
Let's start the relationship. Do you need mentorship, career guidance? And I'm like, whoa, okay, like yeah, let's take it all. Not for me, but for the network, and see what we can do.
Right.
It's all about growth, connecting and growing.
Definitely. And how to just even move forward? Like, how can we? I think we're talking about inequality, and it's like, how can we best move forward? Like, words are good. Like, we stand together, get through this, but then it's like the how is the work, and it's hard work. This is 400 plus years, and we're talking about policing, but then even seeing with coronavirus and COVID-19, the disparities in healthcare across, the board with people of color and education. And I'm even seeing in a Facebook group, like, how can we rebrand, defund the police? Like that is what the conversation is being had because they feel like defund the police is too radical, and I can understand if you don't know what it is, you're like, oh my gosh, it just sounds like we're not trying to pay our police force. And it's like, no, we're actually just saying we want to allocate funds or reallocate money to, the communities, whether it's through education, healthcare, mental health, like, just thinking about that. But these are conversations that I'm seeing that are, taking place. I'm seeing white media reach out and ask Black publicists, like, how can I cover your clients? Or can you pitch, so I'm seeing, I think now people are taking inventory on like how they may have missed the mark or not shown up, and now they're trying to figure out like, how can I do a better job of tapping in and making sure that I'm connecting with everyone, and not just my white publicist peers, but then there are Black publicists a part of this Facebook group who have dynamic clients that I should actually get to know.
Yeah. I guess for me, it's just the sustainability. Like, we have to sustain this. And even with this one young lady that reached out to me, I'm like, I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm looking for a long-term relationship, And I was like, let's start here, and then we can do, this, and this. And she was appreciative. It's only been a week, so far so good. But it's been an overwhelming process, and I'm hoping that these changes will be effective for the whole, for everyone, right? Definitely, but for everyone. And I do believe it's important to distinguish between Black and people of color. But I feel that even though the history is different, once Black people get their just due, it does make it easier for the other minority groups.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with you there. Because I think that a lot of, this country is, of course, like, we were brought here, and because we were brought here, other minorities, not to say it was easier at all, but I think that if anything, a lot of the laws that have, come into place we have been a part of, I will say, like, every movement from, like, whether it's women's suffrage to LGBTQ and all of that. Like, I feel that, Black people have been on the front lines across the board. So yeah, I agree with you, like, the sustainability of just like, this is not just a moment. Like, this is something that really has to continue, and, and hopefully, like, it's basically like Killer Mike said, we were trying to burn this to the ground to the point where we're building in and putting in the proper systems that will work for everyone.
Absolutely. This has been an absolute pleasure. How can people get in contact with you?
Definitely. I am on Instagram. My handle is I am Paris Tyler. My agency is at Vibrant Comms. That's COMMS. And then from there, definitely follow. You can message me. My contact information is on both pages, and I definitely am also on LinkedIn. Huge LinkedIn user, so Paris Tyler on there as well. So always open to connections and meeting new people.
We'll definitely have those links in the show notes. Paris, once again, thank you for a fabulous conversation, a much needed conversation with a different perspective. You are appreciated.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate you, and thank you for the opportunity. This has been great.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. And one thing that I really took away was just the accountability piece, right? If these companies are really going to invest their money into our communities, organizations, including the African American Marketing Association, we have to hold them accountable. And I know it can be hard if we're not working for the company is one thing, right? On the inside, and being a consumer on the outside is a different thing. But be mindful as you watch TV, as you scroll online, as you listen to ads. Be mindful of these commercials and the messaging that you're hearing and seeing. We do have to hold these companies accountable. Another thing is, I was listening to the Karen Hunter show. I watch it on YouTube, clips on YouTube. And the guy had mentioned that if you can, invest in these companies. That way, when you get the proxy statement, quarterly, annual statements, or even monthly, you're invited to those calls. And then you can hold those companies accountable. Like, hey, Bank of America, you said you were going to pledge, I think it was $100 million. Where did that money go? is it the Urban League, NAACP? So I thought that was real interesting and, something to keep in mind. I've invested in a lot of small investor and a lot of companies over the years, but I've never sat on a call. And I know I get the emails, get the reminders, get it, the paper in the mail, and I never sat on a call. But I think now is the time. Now is the time. If you're going to buy these products, if you can invest in the stock, we got to hold these companies accountable. So in closing, follow Paris, follow her online. We have those links in the show notes. And remember, a personal connection leads to an influential network. Thanks for networking with Michelle.